All right. Good evening, or good morning, or good afternoon, wherever in the world you may be. I am in Australia, so it is a very, very early morning, as in 1 o'clock in the morning. My name is Simon Candy, for those of you who don't know me. I run a website called acousticguitarlessonsonline.net, and welcome to Acoustic Guitar Talk, a live stream we have here where we have special guests talking about specific topics to do with acoustic guitar and guitar in general. We are streaming on Facebook today and YouTube as well. So welcome to those viewing on those platforms. And today's topic for this stream is how to get better at guitar faster, which of course we'd all love to be able to do. And it's a very broad topic when we think about it like that. There's many ways we can of course get better, and there's ways that we can become more efficient with our practice, and we can always practice more to get better faster. But the particular topic I want to approach today is about application and applying the concepts behind the music that you play. And I have a very special guest for the stream today, and I can think of no one better to broach this topic with. This person has helped train, coach, and mentor thousands of people with guitar playing around the world, and has also trained and coached other teachers to teach guitar. I've learned personally an incredible amount, both for my guitar playing and my teaching, from this person. And I speak none other of than Tom Hess. So I'd like to welcome Tom Hess to the stream today. Thank you very much, Tom Hess. It's great to see you, and welcome to Acoustic Guitar Talk.
Good to be here, Simon. Thank you.
Now, we are going to be talking about application, essentially. And I find, just in my experience of teaching for many years, that a lot of people sometimes struggle to know exactly what that means. People mistakenly think sometimes it's just learning songs and playing examples and sort of having an illusion that they understand what's going on, but it's a lot more than that, of course. And perhaps to begin, your thoughts on application, and perhaps application versus creativity, because I think they're very much related to each other, but they are separate things as well. So perhaps your thoughts on the importance of application and just the application versus creativity.
Well, application is really a sort of a subset of creativity. So when you are applying something, you're not always being creative, but it's very hard to be creative without applying things that you know or can do, or combining things together. And I think that, and I'm sure this will come up later when we talk, I think one of the challenges that guitar players have, particularly guitar students, is they have it in their mind that they need to learn something and then master it in isolation first before they even think about trying to use it, applying it, combining it, be creative with it. So application really is sort of a prerequisite for certain creative processes. It's very difficult to be creative without being able to apply what you know.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think application is, I think first off, it's curiosity, thinking, well, what if I try doing this with this? What if I take this from here and just see what happens if I put it over here in this particular context? And if you're curious, you're applying stuff. And I think that the creativity just naturally flows from there. Isolated applications is interesting. I think that's important if you're going to take a concept like, for example, a particular scale that you want to get into your playing, perhaps a mode or some sound that you're not previously worked with much, then it will be a good idea to take that scale and play it over a number of different backing tracks. But to know that you really are just applying more there than perhaps creating and just trying out and hearing the scale in different contexts, different styles, perhaps different tempos, different feels. But then to then create with that scale with them, or to begin creating musical ideas with that scale instead of just the pure hearing of it, lead you down that pathway of creativity, and things start to eventuate from there, I think. You're muted.
Oh, sorry. Yes. Yeah, I muted myself to avoid an echo. Yeah, I agree with what you're saying there, Simon, that you gave the example of taking a scale and then applying it over multiple tracks. And that's particularly useful if those tracks are of different tempos or different rhythmic feels or different meters, perhaps different styles. And that helps one to think about, how do I make this fit this if it doesn't naturally fit there? What do I have to do to make this work and make it sound good?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's something that can be of a challenge early on, is being able to take something that you're hearing in a certain context that's been introduced to you that way, and then being able to mold it to various different situations. You've got to take a little bit of creative license, if you like, and change the timing or the phrasing of it, or whatever it might be, to have it work in different situations. So what are the benefits of applying things to your own playing? What's this going to give you that, say, if you never bothered applying anything, what are some of the benefits, in your opinion, Thomas, in regards to applying the things that you learn?
Well, I think there are probably three I can think of off the top of my head. The first one is that it's fun. I mean, it makes guitar playing fun when you can, or more fun when you can take something and then use it, versus just playing a song that you've memorized. And it's sort of the difference between playing guitar and creating music with the guitar. It's a different thing totally. And it could be fun to play your favorite songs or whatever, but I think it's a lot more fun, particularly when you start getting good at it, to improvise, to write your own songs, make arrangements of existing songs. So the point is, one of the benefits of applying what you know is it just simply keeps things fun, keeps things interesting, and makes things more fun. The second is that when you are used to applying things, when this is something that you do in your practice, you dedicate some practice time to taking what you've learned and now applying it somewhere. This makes learning other things in the future easier, because you start to see earlier on, you start to see faster how this could be applied beyond maybe the most obvious way. So if you're not used to, or you don't spend a lot of time dedicated just to applying what you learn, then often when people do try to apply things, they may do so in only the most basic way. Now, for example, if you learn, let's say, in a minor arpeggio, and then you learn it on A, so now it's A minor, right? Where are you going to apply this? Probably over an A minor chord, and that's fine. It certainly works there, but can and does it work anywhere else? And the answer to that question, of course, is yes. But if you're not used to working on applying things in multiple contexts, some people may not know, or may not know how you would take an A minor arpeggio and superimpose it over something else, over an F chord, for example, to use a simple example. So it just makes learning new things easier. And I guess the third thing is to say is that application is the whole point, right? It's the whole reason why we're playing. I mean, we don't seek out new information or new techniques or new music theory knowledge or new skills just to accumulate skills. Okay. So if you think about every technique that you know, or thing that you can do, or music theory concept that you understand, or something that you can hear, aural skills, is each one of those is a brick. Okay. Well, the goal is not to collect bricks. It's like the little kid who plays with Legos. The goal isn't to acquire more Legos. The goal is to build something with the Legos you have, and then go ask mommy for more. Okay? That's sort of the point here. Is if you just have a collection of bricks or Legos doesn't, I guess you could brag about how many Legos you have, but you can't do anything with it. What's the point, really? So that, I think that's really the biggest benefit, is it makes everything worth it. All the effort, the struggle, the periods of frustration, it makes it all worth it when you can apply the things that you've learned.
Yeah, absolutely. I think my thoughts there. I mean, you understand your instrument a whole lot better when you know how to apply things. I mean, you could learn 1,000 songs and be no closer to understanding how the thing works. And I've certainly had a lot of students before with that issue, where they can play, but they don't really understand what they're doing. And through my own experience in terms of applying stuff, I find it's just such a rewarding feeling to be able to pick up a guitar. You're jamming with somebody, you've maybe never met them before, or it's just, you know, an impromptu sort of jam, and you can play and be up and going straight away and just jamming over tunes and, you know, applying the things that you've, you know, trained to do so. So I've certainly had experiences of that over the years, meeting people, jamming, and it's just some of the most rewarding experiences, because you really feel like you understand what you're doing. And you know, it's frustrating to sort of be able to play things but not really know what's going on. And I think I agree, it makes things harder to do when you can see the concepts in a song, and they do become clearer and clearer as you study them and apply them. Songs just become a lot easier to do if that's your thing and you want to learn a lot of songs, and you can see the structures and the concepts. And of course, if you want to write yourself, it's a lot easier to write when you understand how things are put together and how they work. So in terms of applications, I mean, you've spoken of some already, but other methods and strategies for applying musical concepts to your playing. So if you're someone who struggles to, you know, really understand what it is to apply something, how would you suggest to go about that? What would be a really good way to begin if to this point in time you've really just learnt songs and examples?
Great. So yeah, I've got some ideas on this. Before I answer that question, I want to come back to the previous one, because as you were talking, it reminded me of yet an additional big benefit to dedicating practice time to applying things. And that is this: the better you are at being able to apply what you know, the easier it will be to think in principle versus requiring constant examples. So here's what I mean by that. If I listen to a blues player or a jazz player or primarily an acoustic finger picker, those are styles that I don't spend a lot of time in. Okay, so, but because I can and do think in principle, not only with guitar playing, but just generally as a person, I spend a lot of time trying to think that way. It's easier then to see or learn or hear something in another style, another genre, something you wouldn't normally do. Extract from it the value of the principle, and then you know in your mind, okay, I can take this, I haven't seen or done this before, and I can now take that and I see how it can be applied to what I'm interested in doing, the songs I'm writing, the styles I play in, etc. And I think what happens is that many people, if they're a rock guy, for example, they're not interested in seeing or hearing or learning anything about maybe acoustic playing or jazz playing or blues playing or something else, or vice versa. I mean, how many jazz guys listen to metal players and shredders and think, yeah, I'm gonna steal that lick, I could use that here. I mean, it happens, but it doesn't happen as often as it could. So the point is that if you spend a lot of time with applying what you know, you start to see more quickly many more options for how things could be applied. So you start thinking in principle about it instead of thinking, that's a cool jazz lick, I'll use that in my jazz solo over here. Okay, so when you don't spend a lot of time dedicated to just applying things and applying things in a variety of different ways, tempos, etc., it becomes harder to extract ideas or concepts or licks or techniques from other styles and then be able to know right away how you would use it or how it could be applied in the style that you're playing in. So that's something that I noticed among many students that I teach. You can tell often which students can and do think in principle, and which ones struggle with that and just need constant example after example after example. And they can't imagine how this blues pentatonic lick can be used in, some other solo or in some other key or whatever that isn't, a blues scale or whatever. So now getting back to your question about different approaches or methods to apply musical concepts into guitar playing, one thing that's pretty useful, a useful tool that people can use is sequencing. So if you have let's say a scale, it could be an arpeggio sequence or a scale sequence. Probably scale sequences would be easier to talk about. If you have like a sequence of thirds or a sequence of fours or whatever, any type of scale sequence where you're sequencing the scale up or down or whatever, simply by trying to adjust the starting point or the ending point of the sequence to fit a particular chord. So for example, if we're in C major and I'm going to play a sequence of thirds descending down the scale, maybe starting from the C note, the root of the scale, that's going to sound, that C note is going to be a chord tone over the C chord, over the A minor chord, and over the F chord. It'll be in the triad of all three of those. But if the chord is G or G7 that's being played, that C note that the sequence starts on, this would be the 4th or the 11th. So certainly you can begin the sequence there on the 11th, but it's not a chord tone, okay? And perhaps in a non-jazz style, it might be more pleasing to the ear within those other styles to begin the sequence on one of the notes of the G7 chord, so G, B, D, or F. But C and A, those are not really maybe the best fit to start the sequence on without it starting to sound a little bit outside. So that's one thing, is you take a sequence and let's say you've got a chord progression and there's 4 chords and it's, C, F, A minor 7, and G7. Start playing the sequence at different points to match each chord, and not only the starting point, but its ending point. When the sequence ends, the final note of the sequence, a note that perhaps you're going to sustain, it typically is going to sound better if that note sounds good against that chord. So it doesn't have to be a note in the triad. Certainly you could end on the 9th if that's the sound you're looking for, but among a lot of amateur players or students, when they end on the 9th, it's not because they're going for that cool 9th sound. It's just because they missed the chord tone and they didn't calculate, oh, I should have ended it here on the 3rd or the root or whatever. It's not intentional that they ended up on the 9th. They just kind of end up there. So this is a good way to practice with sequencing, to apply the sequence over different chords. That's one example, thinking about the starting and ending points. Another example using sequences again would be to adjust the rhythm to fit the tempo. Okay, so for example, and I don't just simply mean going from 100 beats per minute to 120 beats per minute. All that would simply mean is you got to play the sequence a little faster, or you cut the sequence down in half, and then it's like 60% of that speed or whatever it is. I don't mean it just in that simplistic way, but you can also take sequences that maybe are designed as groups of 4, like a 16th notes or whatever, and you could play them in groups of 7 or groups of 3. As tempos change, by simply changing the division, you don't necessarily need to change the speed of the sequence, even if the tempo from one song to another is vastly different. If you change those 16th notes, make each one of those notes equal, let's say an 8th note triplet, then you're able to fit this into a totally different tempo. So, or a septuplet or whatever else. So by finding here, I teach a lot of rock guys, obviously, a lot of rock and metal guys. I got a lot of those students, all right? And a lot of those guys want to play fast. And you put a backing track in them that's at a tempo where, for that student right now today, that tempo may be too fast for them to play the sequence that they can usually play well. So they have to cut the speed in half. Okay. That's their thinking. Well, I can't play it at 200, but I can play it at 100, but that's a little slow for me. I would like to be able to play it at 150 because that's where I can play it at my fastest or whatever in practice. Okay. Well, you can keep the speed high at 140 or 150 or 160 simply by changing the division. So the fact that there's a tempo change doesn't mean you have to play faster than you currently can, or you've got to cut it down in half where it's really slow. So that's something that I've worked with students before, in different ways to apply things with different rhythmic densities or different tempos. And then the other thing, I'll give you one more example about different approaches to applying musical concepts is simple phrasing. So if you take something that is normal, like let's say a rock or a metal lick or whatever, that's not going to typically be in swung eighth notes or anything like that. So they're eighths or sixteenths or whatever. And then you put it into a swing feel or an eighth note triplet feel or whatever. Now you can create a swing feel out of something that didn't start out that way, or vice versa. You could take a blues or a jazz lick that may be with a shuffle feel or swing feel, and you can simply straighten it out. The lick gets sped up that way. But you can take licks that are cool in one style and import them into your style without it sounding still like a swung eighth note feel or a jazz feel. So in other words, you can rip off the lick without ripping off the style. So it fits better into what it is that you're doing. And that can go in either direction.
Great. A few thoughts come to mind as you were talking, and initially, just in terms of thinking in principle, and I think if you look at a lot of great guitar players, they themselves, if you look at sort of what they've done over the years, maybe not so much even what they play, but the styles that they've studied, there'd be quite a diverse range of music that someone who maybe plays metal has probably looked at some jazz and got something from that, and some blues and vice versa. And I think it's good to draw from different styles. And I know for myself, I mean, I started playing electric guitar, but obviously I play a lot of acoustic and have for some time. And I attend events in Chicago, of course, and while a lot of them are relevant, there are ones that on the surface you might think, well, what are you getting from this? You play acoustic guitar. There's a ton I get from it because there's so much, there's so many great concepts there, and I've taken many things from those classes and events and adapted them both into my own playing, but also to teach. And I teach a lot of things I do with fingerpicking have come from ideas that have been born from attending those events. So I think, you got to look at everything with an open mind and definitely see the concepts that are happening behind that, because a lot of them are very universal. And it's just a little bit of thinking and testing out different ways of making them fit for your particular situation. So I think that's good. And the other thing with application, I think you've got to be patient too. I mean, it's not going to be, if you're going to, like you were saying, when you're talking about sequencing and making things fit over chord progressions, I tend to sort of begin by, if I'm going through that process, I got a sequence, I just kind of window shop it. I just dump it on top of the track and just listen to how it sounds, and not trying to do too much more initially, just to listen and then to sort of react to what I'm hearing and making it fit. But if you're particularly new to that sort of thing, you've got to sort of go through that process of applying stuff. And if you haven't done it before, you've got to be patient. It's better to do it badly than not do it at all, because you're going to get better at doing it naturally as you do it more. So I often say, just do a really bad job of it, because that's going to be way better than doing nothing, And I find that even now when I apply new concepts to my playing, I could sit there and think they sound pretty average, because they probably do, because it's just the beginning of taking something and applying it. But you keep doing it and you find ways to improve it, and each time you come back to it, you can refine it, and the overall skill of applying gets better. But even still, when you are in the early stages of applying a new thing, you got to give it time. And I would say, particularly for myself over the last 10 years, for sure, I would say 70% of my playing, my practice has been application. Because for me, I want to be good at the things I do. I don't want to try and do everything. I want to be good at the stuff I do. And to do that, I've really got to apply in all these different contexts. And it's great. I mean, I love doing it, because you really learn the concept well like that. And sometimes I'll just apply things not for any other reason but to apply, not to create anything that I keep, but, just apply it. And one thing I do a lot, and I teach just an idea of how to, an example of application. I like to call it inside, outside application, and then outside, inside. And it's all to do with around a song. So if we had a song like Purple Haze, Jimi Hendrix, for example. So if I wanted to do some inside out application, the idea is to look at the song and pick something that's happening in the song, take it out of that song and apply it to something else outside. So it's inside the song, we take it out and we apply it. So it could be the intro solo is pentatonic based bluesy sort of playing. So you could take that, literally that solo, and just play it on top of a blues track, and it would sound completely different already. No one's going to sit there and go Purple Haze. It's going to sound completely different. And then as you do that a little bit more, you'll be able to, mold it to fit the blues track. But you'd be surprised sort of how great it can sound just straight off the bat. Or you could take the 7#9 chord that's in that song. You could think, well, how can I use this in my playing? And you could use it in a blues context again, or anywhere there's a 7 chord, try the 7#9. I mean, that chord's a great chord to finish songs on sometimes. You could take chord extensions that are happening in the song. You could take the Dorian mode that the solo is based around in that song and think, okay, well, let's explore this sound, and take not so much the riffs of the solo, not the details, but the concept behind it. So that's like inside out, taking something inside the song and applying it outside. And outside in is more taking a concept that you're working with and putting it into the song. So for example, Purple Haze, maybe you're working on triad shapes. So use Purple Haze as a vehicle to train those triad shapes and voice the chord progression using all different triad permutations across the fretboard. Or maybe it's phrasing and you can take the solo and phrase it differently, or you can improvise over the solo using arpeggios. The idea is you're just using the song as a vehicle to apply skills. So it's not how you might play the song if you were going to play it, but you're using it. And so you've got both those ways of application happening. The song's the central thing, but you're either taking something out of it and applying it to lots of different contexts. The more you can apply it to different ways, the more it becomes part of your playing. And the things you are working on, you can take and put into the song. And then when you're jamming, you'll have all these things that come, to you at the time to play, because you're used to just applying things. I mean, I could take Purple Haze and finger pick and do a Travis picking pattern with it or something. I mean, that sounds ridiculous because you wouldn't play it like that necessarily, but it's not the point. It's just pure application. So I often get a lot of my students to do that, because a lot are sort of in that song mode, learn songs, but they don't really understand what's going on. So it brings more understanding to what they are doing. So that's one thing that I like to do. Now, how about in terms of integrating application into a regular practice schedule? So if you're already sort of setting the way you practice, what are some ideas that come to mind in regards to, I mean, you've spoken of some things, but not so much perhaps what you're specifically doing in application, but how to kind of get it into your practice schedule so it doesn't become something that's another thing to do and it's trying to fit it in. Have you got some ideas in terms of how to kind of integrate it in, so you at sometimes maybe killing two birds with one stone, that type of approach?
Sure. Well, the first thing is don't wait. So That's before we talk about how to integrate it into practice. I think it's important for students or guitar players to get out of their mind that they've got to learn something and master it technically or whatever first, or only learn how to apply it in one context before they do anything else with it. And this is a really big mistake, because the overall growth of that person as a player will be slowed down substantially. And there's nothing more frustrating than being really good at some aspect of your guitar playing and then not being able to use it anywhere. I mean, you might as well not have the skills. You can't use it anyway. So what would be the point of being able to play something perfectly or really fast or whatever, but then you can't use it anywhere? I mean, it's really, it's literally worthless. It's useless. So, and it's very frustrating. That is much more frustrating than simply not having a lot of skills yet, but at least you can tinker around and do some things with the skills you have. At least you can now have fun. It's not fun to be really good at X and then not be able to use X in a song or a solo or anywhere else. So that's the very first thing. And then the second thing is, and you've already touched on it earlier near the beginning, is to take something and apply it over 5 or 6 or 8 or 10 different tracks, different types of songs, different keys, over different chords, different tempos, different rhythms, 6/8 versus 4/4, very music that's very rhythmically dense, a lot of stuff going on, or music that is pretty much wide open, lots of different contexts, and then take whatever the item is that you want to apply or practice applying, and see how you're going to fit this square peg into that round hole. Well, you may need to adjust what you're doing a little bit to make it fit, to make it sound like it's appropriate for the song or the solo or whatever the style. But if one doesn't do that, going back to the example we talked about earlier, if you know an A minor arpeggio and you're just waiting for an A minor chord to come, that's not that's a very simplistic way to apply. It's better than not applying it. For sure, it's better than not applying at all. But there are more things you can do with an A minor arpeggio than wait for the A minor chord. And also, if as I mentioned earlier, I teach a lot of rock and metal guys, so a lot of those guys want to play fast. Okay, so they're focused on technique often, and wanting to, get it faster and get it smoother and cleaner and all that stuff. And that's all great. Nothing wrong with that. But then if the song is slower, they sometimes tend either to not use those types of techniques because, well, you can't play it fast because the song is so slow. And they can't maybe play it at double that speed to fit the tempo. So I guess I just won't play it at all. I'll go back to the minor pentatonic blues box and just screw around over there or whatever. And again, that shows, and I don't mean this as a derogatory term, but it shows a lot of immaturity there, musical immaturity, not personal immaturity. And that's okay. We all started that way. So I'm not putting anybody down. I also did that, when I started out. But the point is that, no, don't abandon the things that or, find ways to use this so it sounds good. You can do more than just playing it as, 16th note triplets or whatever. But taking a single item and applying it over different tracks. See, most people do the opposite. Most people, they'll put on a backing track, for example, and they'll think of 5 or 10 different things that they know and try and apply all of those to this particular track. They in a sense, they've kind of got it backwards, where there's one track. So there's essentially one context in which to apply things. And then they just start going through their mind of the different techniques and licks and ideas that they know and try and play them all over this track. And that's certainly way better than doing nothing. It's a step in the right direction. But it would be perhaps more useful just to take one thing, one lick, one technique, one concept, apply it over 5 or 10 different tracks, because now we're really getting into some pretty deep thinking, principled thinking about how you apply the things that you know or can do, or even if you can't fully do them yet because you haven't mastered them yet, that's okay. You start seeing how they can relate and apply. And again, as I mentioned earlier, it helps you to start thinking in principle musically, so that when you hear someone else play and that's not your song and not your style or whatever, you start to see more clearly, oh, I know how this could apply over here and how it could apply over here, because you practice this every day. So I think your original question about this was, how do you add this to your practice without stacking on an additional half an hour or hour of your practice time every day? Well, you can do it by this. If what you're working on generally is, I'll just call it practice item number one, and that could be anything, a little piece of a solo or an arpeggio or scale or sequence or whatever. And instead of spending all of that practice time isolating it, getting the technique down, maybe getting the phrasing down, you can simply divide the time dedicated for that practice item and spend some of that time with applying it, even though it's not yet fully mastered and it doesn't sound perfectly clean yet. That's okay. That's okay. So that's my suggestion there.
Great. Awesome. There is a question here from, I think is it Alan or Alon Kaufman? Hopefully I'm close to the correct pronunciation there. How would you apply techniques to a simple 3-chord Campfire song on solo acoustic guitar? So, well, my thoughts there would be, there's a lot of techniques, so it depends on what techniques you would be talking about. But if we're talking about a 3-chord Campfire song, you could think it's often good to take one chord progression, say one 3-chord song, and just challenge yourself to play it as many different ways as you possibly can on the guitar. So some different ways that you could play it, if we've got a simple 3-chord song, would be open chords, of course. You could play it with bar chords. You could play it with triad shapes. You could, a thing I like to do a lot is drone open strings around chords higher up the fretboard, so you get a nice big sound. Sometimes if you're talking solo acoustic guitar, so I'm going to assume that's just you playing on your own. So, you know, triad shapes, for example, can sound very thin when it's just you playing, but if you drone open strings in with them, so if you've got a triad shape like an A to an E, you know, that can sound a little thin when there's nothing else behind you, but you can bring in the droning of open strings there. So it's a much bigger sound, and so it's a different way to play chords than always just playing down in the open position. There's nothing wrong with this. And in fact, what I would probably do if I was arranging something 3 chords would be and it's just on a single guitar, I'm going to think like a band. I'm going to, want to create the same sorts of dynamics that you get in a band. It's going to be different, but I'm going to think dynamically. So there might be times where I just play smaller chord shapes for a small portion of time, and then there's more impact when I go into, hitting the open chords. Of course, you can play bar chords and extensions on your chords. You can chordal pick and have little, embellishments that you can add to the chord progression. You can finger pick it. There's a ton of things that you can do, but it's a good idea to take one chord progression as opposed to always changing that up, because it's challenging you to think deeper rather than broader. So if you keep looking at new stuff, you'll get distracted with that and you'll just sort of be surface level. It's a little bit like trying to make, one note sound great. Instead of having all the notes there to, play with, you got one note. So you really got to think, and well, how can I make this great? How can I phrase this. And so if you only got one chord progression, you're restricting yourself. It's a restriction, which is good because it gets you out of playing what you would normally do. So there's lots and lots of ways that you could apply techniques to anything, but a simple 3-chord song to make it sound a lot more interesting, instead of just strumming away on chords, which can get a little, tiresome after a while. So that's, and unless there's something I'm not quite understanding with the question there, that's how I would answer that. I'm not sure if you've got any thoughts on that, Tom Hess.
I do. I've got a few thoughts on this. And this is a really good question, actually, Alan or Alan, however you pronounce your name. So going off of what Simon just talked about, he said, he made a couple of comments. The one he said, thinking more deeply instead of more broadly. In other words, instead of thinking about how many different things you can, how many different, totally different things you could do, how deep can you go with the ideas that you have? How can you refine it further, add another layer? So those are some concepts to think. It's a different, totally different way of thinking, this way versus this way. Then the second thing is that if the song is going to have singing in it, if there's either you're going to sing or someone's going to sing over it, this would drastically change, for me, it would change how I would play the tune. So with all songs that have voice, typically there are instrumental sections, and then there are the singing sections. Well, when the singer is singing, whether that's you or someone else, the primary, typically, not always, but typically the primary focus is and ought to be on the singer or the singing, whether that's you or somebody else. Okay, so I would tend not to be putting in the most musically complex version of the 3 chords while the singer is singing. I probably would reserve that for when the singer is not singing, and now it's just me, or in this case you, playing, and then I would seek to do more when it's just truly instrumental and there's no singing going on. It's kind of like in a rock band setting. It would be a little bit strange in most cases if you start soloing all over the singer's verse and choruses, all those. Maybe at the very end there'd be an outro solo after the chorus has been heard, 8 times. You might solo over that with the singer, but generally, verse 1 doesn't include a guitar solo on top. Well, why not? Well, because the focus in this moment is on the singer and the lyrics. So I would tend to make the more simpler versions when the singer is singing, and then reserve the deeper, more complicated stuff, more intricate stuff, sophisticated stuff when the singer is not singing. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is that expanding on that concept of having 2 different ways to play it. If you've got 3 chords and the song goes on for 4 minutes, that's a long time to listen to 3 chords, really a long time. So if you play regardless of how you play the 3 chords, strum them in a certain way, do Travis picking with acoustic guitar, anything else, if you do it the same way, no matter how cool that way is, it's going to get stale for the listener. You might think it's cool because you're the one doing it, so you might be having fun, but the effect on the listener starts to go away over time. They build up something called musical immunity. They become immune to what's going on. So, for example, to use an example in a totally different style, as I mentioned, I teach a lot of these metal guys, and a lot of times they'll have songs on their 7-string guitars, and they got the low B, and they want to tune that down to A, and right. So what happens on the first? They recorded a whole album, and here's what happens. Song 1, what's the first chord? Boom, low A, on the 7-string guitar, right? How does the song end? Boom, on the same note. Guess how the second song starts? On the same note. It's on the low 7th string. Guess how that song ends? Yep, you guessed it. Same thing. Guess how the third song starts? Guess how the whole album is? So it's a cool sound. It's a great sound. There's massive amounts of power there, and it sounds really cool. And it feels good when you're playing it. But the problem is, even for fans of that style, the impact, the power is lost because the listener builds up immunity. It's not special anymore. Okay. It's like, well, you get the idea. So that principle, it's very common among, really hardcore metal songwriters to do this. Not really the professional ones, but the more the amateur ones. They make this mistake all the time because they lose the power. They lose the very thing that they're trying to communicate, which is power. Okay. So getting back to your example, if you've got a really cool, let's say Travis picking thing, and you do that the whole time and it's the same pattern and you're playing the chords in the same position, in the same inversion, no matter how great it is, the effect is lost. So I would be less concerned about how should I play over these three chords. I'd be more concerned about how am I going to sustain this for 4 minutes. So here's a chunk of time where the chord progression goes by. I'm going to play it a certain way. Now, 30 seconds later, I'm still playing this. Maybe I should have another way to do this. And then maybe I should have yet another way to do this. And then yet another way to do this. So it's not, it doesn't get stale. You don't have to change it up on every chord or every repetition. But if it's the same thing, no matter how great it is, it just loses its effect. So those are the two main things I'd be thinking about. How to repeat this for a long period of time, and what to do when the singer is singing or there's a soloist. I know you mentioned you're playing by yourself, but the principle applies if you're playing with others. If there's a second guitar player or, I don't know, a horn player or whatever, and he's doing a solo, you might want to pull it back a little bit. So those are my thoughts on that. Great question, though.
Yeah, and just finally on that, I think if you are playing solo, listen to the song that you're playing and listen to the other instruments in the song, because you're going to grab ideas from those. For example, little bass lines that you can grab in between your chord changes. Listening to the drums will influence the way you might strum. So if you want to pick up a bit of a groove and get a bit of a percussive hit on the second and fourth beat, for example. But if you really listen to the other instruments, you can really replicate the feeling, and the idea behind that in a solo context. It's one of my favorite things to do. I love doing that stuff. Just seeing, how can I take this song and make it work on an acoustic guitar? And sometimes it's solo, sometimes it might be with somebody else. But it's just, learning bass lines, and in doing that you get such a great understanding of music overall. You're not just sort of guitar and everything else is just out of your vision, so to speak. So that is great. Do we have time for one more question here, Tom Hess?
Sure.
Okay, we'll just grab this last question here. I know you've got a lot on. So the question, what have we got? How would you recommend structuring a practice time when practicing applying a concept over a variety of tempos and styles? So do you have some thoughts on that?
Sure. We may have partially covered this a bit already. So maybe Mr. Crispy Kevin, maybe he missed it, or maybe I didn't communicate as clearly as I could have. So here's some things to think about here, Kevin. First of all, you don't have to take away time from a particular item to then stack more time on for just application. I mean, okay, obviously the more time that you have to practice, the better. Okay, but we all have lives. Okay, most of you have jobs, right? So maybe you have families. There are some limitations on your time. Okay, so the first thing that I would say is that instead of spending all of your time isolating a particular thing for technical reasons to improve it, take some of that dedicated time and spend it on applying. So you've got 4 or 5 different backing tracks, 10 different backing tracks in different styles, and just take your item, spend 30 seconds, 60 seconds on the first track. May not be good yet. It may not be perfect yet. Maybe you're still struggling on making it fit or determining how you're going to make it fit, but don't get lost. What I mean is, don't say, okay, I've got 20 minutes to do this, and then you end up spending the whole 20 minutes on the first track, because You try it, maybe it doesn't go so well, you don't like the result, you think you can make it better, and you probably can. But the goal, remember what the goal is, okay? The goal is to be better at applying musical concepts. The goal is not to find a way for this lick to be applied to that context. Okay, so I'll give you an analogy that I use when I teach songwriting. For the songwriters that I coach, I often tell them, spend part of your songwriting time writing for the trash can. What does that mean? It means that the goal for you is not to write a great song. That's not really the primary goal. Writing great songs is a consequence, or should be a consequence, of you becoming a better songwriter. So what is the real goal? The real goal is not to write a great song. The real goal is for you to be a great songwriter, because anyone can kind of get lucky with enough time and write a song that's pretty good. Writing a whole album of songs or 5 albums of songs, that requires completely different, like, you're not going to do that with luck. Okay. At that point, you're either a great songwriter or you're not. So the goal is not to write a great song. The goal is for you to become a better songwriter. So by you spending all of your time writing that one song and neglecting all the other aspects of songwriting practice, because you're not really practicing songwriting, you're not practicing anything. You're just trying to skip the practice and go to a finished product song. Okay. And yes, you will get a little bit better as a songwriter when you finish a song and it's good. That is true. But you will improve your songwriting skills faster by not doing that right now. And instead, just write. Work on writing. So you work a little bit of here, you work a little bit over here, you work a little, and it's going to feel like, well, I'm not getting anything done. I've spent all this time practicing my songwriting. I've got no finished songs. The ones I have are only mediocre. They kind of suck. I don't feel very good. And that's why people don't do it, because they don't feel very good. They feel better when they've got a song they can hold in their hand and say, I wrote that. That makes them feel good, makes them feel proud. And what I'm saying is, we will get there, but not today. The goal is, for my goal for you, is to make you a better songwriter so that you can do this anytime you want. You can do it on command, okay? Not like once a year, okay? Same principle would apply here. The goal is not for you to take a lick that you know and apply it to a particular song, really. That would be a short-term goal. The big goal ought to, in my opinion, ought to be that you become a master of applying anything to any musical context, or to at least a wide variety of musical contexts. That's the real goal, because then you can think more in principle and you can learn to apply pretty much anything into most contexts. That's what mastery is about. Okay? It's about the process of improving your skill set. It's not about a result of, I applied this lick to that song and it sounds great. Okay, I'm done. It's really not what we're after at this point. It's my opinion. Hope that helps.
Yeah, that's great. That's exactly right. I totally agree. So, Tom Hess, I believe you have something here for people to check out today. If you'd like to tell us about that.
I do. I have this is totally free. You can download it, right now. If you go to my website, the link is, there you go, tomhess.net/fretboard-freedom. And you can grab this fretboard freedom blueprint to discover a nearly effortless way to visualize scales on the guitar. It's more than just scales, but it starts with scales. And after you study the blueprint, it's a pretty short and easy read. And if you just follow what it says for 15 to 30 minutes, a day. And as you do, you'll start to see why you don't need to have, a bunch of natural talent to master your fretboard. Okay. All you really need to do is just do the right things in the right order, in the right way. By the way, that's literally the definition of natural talent. Natural talent is someone who does the right things in the right order, in the right way. That's what natural talent literally is. Okay. So if you don't have natural talent, certainly you can learn the right things in the right order and the right way. Okay. So, anyway, this will really help you to visualize the fingerboard better and more easily and more deeply, so that you can recall where things are on the guitar much faster. Because in real life playing, improvising or jamming with your friends or playing in a band, you don't have time in the middle of the song to say, "Oh, hold on, guys, let me figure this out here." Well, just wait for me. That's no good. Either you know it or you don't, right? And you want to be the guy or the girl who knows it. So, yeah. So check that out. Download. It's totally free. Simon, you're muted, buddy.
I almost got through it. That's fantastic. I've also got something here that I'll just briefly talk about. This is a fingerpicking masterclass. This is also free, that you can download at the address below. I'll put the links in the chat in a moment, so if you want to grab them there, you can. But this is a masterclass I did a few years back on fingerpicking, but it's kind of in line with what we've been talking about today. If you don't fingerpick, you could watch this class and take the principles behind what I'm doing and get a lot from them and apply them to your own playing. And that's basically what the class is about. It's taking concepts and applying them to a chord progression. And throughout the class, I only use one chord progression for the purpose of what I was touching on before and what Tom Hess was talking about in regards to going deep, not broad. So it's one chord progression, but it's a variety of ways to approach it in a fingerpicking context. But again, the principle behind what I'm teaching is more valuable than the fingerpicking itself. Looking at things like different harmonies to apply to a progression, 10th harmony, 6th harmony, very chord voicings that you can apply to a common chord progression, fingerpicking patterns, soloing approaches over the progression. So certainly good for application. Now, it comes with a detailed PDF booklet. So you'll get the masterclass, so you can watch that at your own leisure. You've got the PDF booklet that has all the examples and explanations and so forth in there. So it's very clear and you can follow along very easily. And there's a lot that you can get out of there. But look beyond the examples and look for the concepts behind what is happening there, and you'll get a lot of value out of that. Okay, so I'll put those links in the chat in a moment, but I would like to thank you, Tom Hess, for being here today, part of the stream. Very, very appreciative of your time and all the great value and experience you have to provide us all. I've really enjoyed the chat. Application is definitely a big, it's a thing I love doing, and it's a thing I love teaching because I think people get the most out of it. Songs, if you're into songs, that's great, but I can tell you songs come and go. I've learned probably thousands of songs over the year, and I can probably remember about 5, unless I'm gigging regularly or whatever. But if you know how to apply things, you can jump in on any song, any time that you've played before or even not played, and you'll be fine, or with very little practice. So the concepts are what stick. So thank you, Tom Hess. I really appreciate your time. Thank you, everybody, for being here. We'll do more of these talks as time goes on, and I hope you all have a great morning or afternoon or evening, wherever you are. And thank you, Tom Hess. And
thank you, Simon, and thank you to Alan and Kevin for the very intelligent questions. They were very good. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Thank you, Tom Hess. Thank you, guys. Enjoy your day. We'll see you soon.